Hello, everybody. This is Mr. Combs, and we're going to continue talking about critical reading. This time, I want to talk about some strategies. And I have two main strategies that I want to talk to you about today. So, why do we talk about reading strategies? Well, developing a plan for critical reading is not always easy. And because of this, several techniques have been developed over the years to help students get started reading actively and critically. And in this presentation, we will learn how to use a few of those techniques. I have two main techniques that I want you to be familiar with. The first technique is the SQ3R method. Now, you may have heard of this method before. The beauty of this method is it is a very easy to use and easy to understand method, and therefore it's used with students at all levels. So you can use it in grade school, you can use it in high school, and you can certainly use it as you interact with the text in your college classes. SQ3R is a useful technique for understanding written information, for example, a textbook or an article. It helps you to create a good mental framework for a subject, so it helps you get ready to read. And after you read, you can fit the facts into the framework that you've developed. It helps you to begin asking questions about a text during reading. And after you read, it prompts you to use review techniques that will help you to remember. And the steps for using the SQ3R method are survey, question, read, recite, and review. So the first step is to survey. When you survey a text, you skim over the entire text to get an overview of the material. No need to read every sentence, but it will probably be a good idea to read the introductory paragraph, the conclusion, and maybe the first sentence in each body paragraph. If you're reading a chapter of a textbook and you have headings, notice those, and in fact, you might read the headings instead of the first paragraph of every chapter. Also, notice any words in bold or italic print. And these will, along with the headings, usually alert you to the main points of the text or the main information, the most important information. Also, read any of the supplemental information provided. Now, in an article, if you're reading an article in a journal or a magazine, usually there is, especially in a journal, an abstract that will give you an overview of the article's main points. If you're reading a textbook, then usually there are learning objectives at the beginning and study questions at the end and a review section at the end. Make sure you read those before you actually read the chapter. And I know that's a little bit backwards, or it seems backwards, but they will really help you to understand more of what you read if you read the supplemental information provided first. And then also look at any pictures, tables, or graphs. Now, the next thing you want to do is you want to question. And when you question, based on your skimming, you formulate questions you can answer by reading. Now, the ranger here says that the better your questions, the better your comprehension will likely be. So you don't want to ask very simple questions here. Or if you do ask simple questions, you want to make sure you also ask questions that are a little more complex and will allow you to dig deeper into the material and understand more of the material in a detailed way. Questioning is an important step, since when your mind is actively searching for answers to questions, it becomes engaged in learning. So one of the things I might do is just have those questions written on a page that you can answer as you go along reading. So the idea is you want to ask questions that will lead to better comprehension. So, for example, if the topic is cell division, you might not just want to say, "What is cell division?" That, you can look in the text and find that very easily. You might want to ask questions that will allow you to dig deeper and understand details more. So, how does cell division occur is a good question. Or, what are the steps involved in cell division? So, what I have here for you are some headings from textbooks. And what I want you to do is to think about each and jot down a few questions that you could ask based on these headings. So, let's look at the first one. It's a sociology textbook. Let's say that you have the heading Body Language and Deception. What are some questions you could ask there that could be answered as you read a section of a chapter with this heading? So I'll give you a few moments and then we'll look at some questions that I came up with. All right. So a couple questions that I've come up with is you could ask, rather than just ask what is body language, what is deception? You might ask something like, how is body language related to deception? You might ask, how does deception affect body language? What body language indicates deception? So, those are all questions that you can answer as you read the section. Okay, let's look at another one. So, this is from a business textbook, and the heading is The Players in Business Ownership. All right, so when the heading says The Players in Business Ownership, I guess I'm thinking about that if there's a business, there are several different people that work together to allow someone to own a business or to allow a business to function, right? So the players in business ownership, what I might ask, you could ask who are the different players in business ownership. That's a very basic question, though. And if you ask that question, don't only ask that question, ask others as well. So a couple that I have, rather than who are the players, I have asked who are the most important players in business ownership? Or you might say, who is the most important player? I've also said, how do the players in business ownership work together? So, how do those people who are working together so that a business can run, how do those people work together? And those are questions that will allow me to dig deeper. All right, so I want you to try this next one and type a couple, at least two, of the questions that you can formulate from this next section heading into the box online. So this is from an anatomy textbook, and it's the skeletal system. So what are a couple of questions? Go ahead and think about that for a minute. Type those in, and then we'll move on. So the next step is to read. So after you've surveyed, after you've questioned, you're going to read the text. Read carefully, rereading difficult passages if needed. As you read, try to answer all of the questions you posed in the previous step. Also, take notes and annotate as you read. So, we've talked about note taking and annotating a text before. Here's where you can incorporate what we've learned before into the SQ3R process. And then, of course, always look up unfamiliar words to make sure you understand the information completely. So after you read, you're going to recite. And when you recite, you try to answer the questions posed earlier without looking at the text or your notes. So here you're going to put all your notes away, you're going to put the text away and just have those questions either provided if it's a textbook chapter or that you created, or you could have a bit of both types of questions. Questions you create and questions you found at the end of the chapter. And you're going to try to answer those without looking back at your notes. And really do not move on from this step until you can do that, until you can give basic answers without looking back at your notes to the questions that you have posed or that were posed for you. And the best practice during this step is to read the questions and answer them aloud, because hearing as well as speaking will help you better understand and remember the information. And the final step is to review. Now, when you review, you summarize what you have read in a short writing, maybe a paragraph. You may also make an outline, note cards, and/or illustrations to help you remember key concepts from the reading. And during this time, it may be helpful to scan portions of the text again to review concepts you still have questions about. And what I think is that this step is the step where you actually make a tool you can use later on. So as you read a chapter, it will probably be one of several chapters covered on an exam, for example. So as you read a section or an article or a chapter, and you summarize what you have learned in a short writing, or you make an outline, or you do both, then when it comes time to study, or when it comes time to apply what you have read to a project or to an assignment you're doing, you can just pull that summary out, pull that outline out, and refer back to it without having to go back to the original piece. And I think that's excellent, especially if you're studying for a final exam or something, or a midterm exam or something like that. It's much easier to go back to a summarized version that will give you only the main points very quickly and concisely than it is to go back to the original and have to wade through it again. So the review step in the SQ3R method is the step where you are creating a tool for use later on. Now, I want to tell you a couple things about the SQ3R method. It's not the greatest for math textbooks, foreign language textbooks, or literary works. So, in a math textbook, rather than use SQ3R, just focus your energy on solving mathematical problems using the information provided in the chapter. Foreign language texts, especially beginning foreign language texts, usually focus on vocabulary, verb tense, and sentence construction. So just focus on those things. And literature texts may be novels, short stories, poems, and the purpose of reading may be focused on the big picture more than on a particular chapter or section. So SQ3R works best for informational text where you're given a lot of information. So SQ3R is an excellent technique to use with biology, psychology, sociology, history, most of your sciences. And then I also want to give you some tips for using SQ3R. The first tip is to plan ahead and start early. SQ3R takes time and is not a strategy that can be employed or used effectively the night before a test. Plan to read each chapter before it's discussed in class. Doing this will make the class lecture a review. It is also likely to help you understand the material that is presented in class at a deeper level. And what I used to do in college, especially with classes that weren't my favorite, I love taking math classes and I love taking English classes. Science I had a hard time with. So, especially with science, I would always do my reading of a chapter before we talked about it in class. And I would take a notebook, and if you open up a notebook, you notice that there is a page on the left and a page on the right. And I would take my notes from my reading always on the pages on the left. And then in class, I would use the right pages for my notebook. And I would take notes from class next to the page where that same information is in my notes from the reading. And then I would, after each class, or maybe at the end of the week, or every couple days or so, I would sort of read through both sections and make some connections between, oh, well, this is what they said in the textbook, and here's where my professor brought it out in lecture. Or, well, this is something said in the textbook, but my professor said to think about this in the way that he or she said it, but I can still make that connection. And you should certainly identify information in the chapter you don't understand and plan to talk with the professor about it.